Welcome to video number 50 in the Using iTrain tutorial series. My name is Bob. In this tutorial we look at how to create and use action buttons. Welcome back. In the last tutorial we created our first simple action that turns on a light when a train triggered a particular feedback sensor on entering this block. We can simulate that, of course, by simply clicking on the feedback sensor, and we see that the light turns on. We also created another action to turn the light off when the train exits the block. Again, we can simulate that by simply clicking on the feedback sensor, and now the light is off. Those actions started running as soon as we created them. In other words, they were immediately active. We can see the status of the actions in the actions editor, and we can make an action active or deactive by checking or unchecking the tick box here. But there is another, perhaps more convenient method that we can change the active state of an action, and that is by using something called an action button, which we place somewhere on our switchboard. The action button will allow us to do several things. We can use it to make the action active or inactive. We can use it to interrupt and stop a previously started action. We can use the button to manually execute an action that does not have any conditions. So yes, you can have an action without conditions. We can also use the button to manually test the execution of an action. And the button provides us with a visual indication of the action's state. So let's create an action button for each of the actions that we created in the last tutorial. To do that, we open the switchboard editor, select the location where we want to place the button, and then we can double click it from the sidebar here. It's the blue button. You may have noticed that I used a slightly different method for placing the button on the switchboard compared to the way we placed the light element in the last tutorial. Either method can be used to place any element. Okay, so we double click on the action element to open it, and because we have previously already created the action, we don't have to fill the name and anything in. We can select it from the action list here, and we're going to have this button for the light on action. When we select that, we see that it immediately shows us what the condition and execution commands are. So we simply just click OK to save it. And we can do the same for the light off. So we select the location where we want the button to be, double click on it, then double click to open it, go to the board item, select the light off action, and everything is automatically filled for us. We click OK to save it. And what we can also do is put a text box next to each of these, and we can give it a description, so we can see that on the switchboard. So light on, we'll align it to the left, click OK, and this one was light off. Align it to the left and click OK. And then to save it and apply it, we click Apply, Save and Exit, and there we have our two buttons on the switchboard. We can activate and deactivate the action by Alt clicking on the action, and you notice the color changes from dark blue, which is active, and light blue when it is inactive. And that is the same as the status that we can see in the main actions editor. So here you can see it is light blue and it is unticked, and the light off is dark blue, which is ticked and active. So it's doing exactly the same as checking and unchecking those boxes. With this action inactive, clicking on the feedback sensor does nothing to start or turn the light on. When we Alt click on it, then we see that the light turns on and off. Now, as I turn this sensor on and off, if you look very carefully at the two buttons here, you'll see that they will briefly flash a cyan blue color. And if you look very, very carefully, you'll notice that the number 1 is showing in the button. That number that you see in the button tells us the number of active executions for that particular action. For this very simple action, that number flashes up very, very briefly. But for more sophisticated actions, you may notice that the number remains displayed. So that number implies that we can have multiple instances where the action is being used. I haven't explored actions to that extent, so maybe that is something for a future tutorial. Now again, this particular action is a very simple one that operates extremely quickly, but we can have more sophisticated actions, and in those types of actions we may want to be able to interrupt and stop a previously started action, and to do that we use the Shift and click. If we have a look at an example of a more complicated action, such as this one here or this one, when we interrupt and stop the action by means of the Shift and click, the listed execution commands are halted at the particular command when we press the Shift and click, and any remaining commands in the list are not activated or executed, but the action remains active. Clicking Alt click again restarts the action from where it was paused. Now, simply manually clicking on the button causes the execution of all the execution commands that are listed, regardless of the status of any of the conditions. the conditions are ignored and the commands are executed. Manually clicking on the action button is meant to be used for testing the execution part of the action and ignoring the conditions. But we can also use it to manually execute an action that does not have any conditions. For example, we could create an action button that simply turns on a relay or a light or to play a sound. So we can have actions without any conditions, and we manually operate them using an action button. And that is action buttons, a useful addition to the switchboard to provide a visual indication of the state of an action, to activate and deactivate an action, to interrupt an action, or to manually start the execution part of an action. But remember, manually starting an action completely ignores all of the conditions. So don't be surprised when the action executes, even when you know that the conditions have not been met. In the next tutorial, we'll create an action that plays a sound file using blocks as the condition. The advantage of using a block compared to using a feedback is that it allows us to select a specific train or train type. So hope to see you then. Thanks for watching. If you like what you saw, please click the like button before you go.